19-year-old Mia Marcano was born in Pembroke Pines, Florida, to parents Marlon and Emma. She had a younger brother, Marlon Jr., whom she affectionately called Munchie. Although her parents separated when she was young, the family stayed close, and Mia and Marlon Jr. shared a great relationship with their stepmom, Giselle. Mia was known for being ambitious, adventurous, and fiercely loyal, particularly when it came to her brother. Her family described her as someone with an infectious energy that drew people to her. When planning her future after high school, staying in Florida was non-negotiable. She loved her life there and initially chose the University of Central Florida before moving to Valencia College to pursue an associate degree in arts. Her long-term goal was to train in sports medicine or physiotherapy. Creative arts, particularly fashion and design, were also passions of hers, and she was a regular participant in local carnivals. Florida's vibrant culture, full of festivals, fairs, and fun, made it the perfect home for Mia.
Before we continue, Christmas is almost here, and we've got something special for you. Imagine cozying up in the comfiest Christmas hoodies, designed to bring the magic of the holidays to life. Whether it's for you or the perfect gift for someone you love, our exclusive Christmas hoodies are here to make this season unforgettable. Don't wait. These one-of-a-kind designs are selling out fast. Visit uncoverizeshop.fourthwall.com now and grab yours before it's too late. And here's a little holiday treat. Use promo code CHRISTMAS to get 15% off your order. Let's make this Christmas the coziest one yet. Link is in the description.
While studying, she lived at the Arden Villas apartment complex, which was primarily occupied by fellow students. Landing a job at the complex as a leasing assistant was ideal, allowing her to work close to home and balance her studies with ease. She was only an hour's flight away from her family and would often jet back to catch up, never going long without seeing them. On the September 24th, 2021, Mia was set to grab a flight home for the weekend. But when she didn't send a text to say that she had arrived at the airport or was boarding her flight, alarm bells rang. It was such a natural thing for most people to do, and Mia was always in communication with her family. It was now hours later and long past the time she was due in, but she never got off the plane. When it got to around 9:30 on that Friday night, her family could no longer rationalize her not answering her phone. They reported it to the police and requested that a welfare check be carried out. Orange County Sheriff's Office. This line is being recorded. This is Operator Winstead. How may I help you? Hi, I'm calling to find out if I can have a wellness check. Deputy Samir Paulino went over to Arden Villas, arriving at 10:02 p.m., but no one was there. He noted that nothing on the outside looked out of the ordinary and nothing stood out to him as being wrong. He waited for her roommate and eventually got in. They knocked on Mia's bedroom, but there was still no answer. And when they tried to force the door, it was obvious it was locked from the inside. The deputy then checked through her window and saw a small bookcase against her door. He finally managed to open the window and get in. Her room painted a troubling picture. Everything was a mess, and red stains covered the pillows. Her bedding was everywhere and her luggage, ready to go with her to the airport, was sat by her desk. Her father, Marlon, had put his own locks on her windows for extra safety, but these had been broken off. Some of her jewelry was also broken. With no indication at all as to where she was, there was a lot to go over. Despite how concerning the inside of the apartment looked, Deputy Paulino discussed the case with his supervisor, Corporal Dale, but neither of them notified the Criminal Investigations Division. Paulino also left the scene to respond to other calls without informing anyone about the evidence of a potential crime he found inside the apartment. Her roommate was upset and concerned and was quick to give the police a name. Mia had recently been getting some unwanted attention from a maintenance worker in the complex. He had become more and more persistent, and as a result things were very uncomfortable for Mia. This man was 27-year-old Armando Caballero, and he had been working at the apartment complex since June of that year. More people backed what her roommate was saying and said they had seen this happening too. By the sounds of it, Armando was obsessed with the 19-year-old and was constantly finding ways to talk to her and ask her out. She had rejected him so many times and was now bordering on being a bit scared about it all. He even sent her $700 via Cash App for, quote, being pretty. She sent the money straight back, but didn't really know what to do anymore other than try and ignore him. Other women at the complex had had their own issues with Armando, and the police were suddenly receiving a lot of the same information about him. Another woman living at the Sabar Club apartments later told investigators that he had written her a note asking her for a date back in March 2021. She wasn't sure but had agreed to go anyway, but when he asked to hang out sooner, she said she couldn't and he was not happy. After this, a weight was thrown at her window in the middle of the night. She said given the way he had been behaving, she felt sure it was him and called the police. They logged it and made some searches, but eventually the case was dropped and he was not charged. Just a couple of months later, Armando was working at Arden Villas. As Mia's family arrived at around 3 a.m. to help with the search, they pointed out several things to Deputy Paulino that they were worried weren't standing out to him. One of them was a yellow box cutter under the bed and her childhood teddy bear, which her family said she would take with her on every trip no matter how short it might be, was there too. An hour later at 4 a.m., a familiar face arrived in front of Mia's apartment with his roommate, Armando himself. It was now close to 5 a.m. Armando was off work and had no reason to be turning up there. Mia's family had heard enough about him to know exactly who he was. The fact he was there with no need to be was very unsettling for them. Why was he inserting himself into this? Detectives asked him if he knew what was going on, and he replied that he was on the phone with a coworker, Tatiana, who had allegedly informed him that Mia was missing, which was why he was there. Mia's family knew there was more to this, especially given everything that they had heard from Mia, and they wanted answers. He denied all their allegations, however. He told the officers that he hadn't seen her around the complex before she went missing. It was hours beforehand, and he didn't have anything else to offer. Detectives didn't feel they really had any reason to talk to him further, let alone arrest him. And with this, Armando left the complex. A background check showed he was a convicted felon, having been convicted in 2017 of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Back in 2013, he was arrested for using a destructive device resulting in property damage and discharging a weapon on school property. Polk County Sheriff's deputies were called to the campus of Warner University after a report of a bomb going off inside a dorm. The report said that Armando had admitted to using the improvised explosive as a prank on other residents in the dorm. Fortunately, no one was injured. The security guard that worked on the complex managed to lift fingerprints from Mia's window using tape, but Deputy Paulino did not take them, saying that it wasn't a high-priority case and that he could keep the tape. The same guard had also noticed a screwdriver and cell phone case in the back seat of Armando's car, but with no warrant they couldn't open it and search. Orange County Sheriff John Mina said, "There is not enough there in that video or happened that night to establish an arrest or that this person has to be detained." A different deputy was soon notified about Mia's case and went to the formal investigation was quickly launched. It was now September 25th, 8:47 a.m. Investigators got a call from Mia's family saying they needed to head to Armando's apartment. Still bothered by him and convinced he knew more, they had started their own covert surveillance and had been watching him from their car. They saw him come outside with a glove, a backpack, and a pink blanket. A blanket they knew they recognized. When police got there, Armando gave Mia's family permission to come into the apartment with the police watching on so they could take a look around, but nothing could be touched or moved and authorities could only watch as they didn't have a proper search warrant. At 3 p.m. hours later, Armando left his apartment, and just an hour and a half after that, police confirmed he was now indeed a suspect in the disappearance of Mia Marcano. Authorities were trying to get hold of a proper search warrant that would finally be approved just over 24 hours after Mia went missing. At 9:35 p.m. that same night, Armando sent a text message. After this, to everyone's surprise, he too would vanish. Was it possible that Mia was being held somewhere against her will and he had gone to meet her or move her? Maybe even go on the run? Police just didn't know. 100 of volunteers were now joining in the search and miles of area were being combed through, but there was still no trace of Mia anywhere. Analysis of Mia's unit showed that at 2:14 p.m., just 3 hours before she was last seen, a master key had buzzed into her unit, but this was not her key. This fob was linked to none other than Armando. Morsec showed that he had accessed her apartment again at 4:34 p.m. Mia then buzzed into her unit to grab her bag and dashed to the airport, a trip they knew she never made. This appeared to conclude that Armando was in Mia's apartment and waiting for her when she arrived home. And at 5:52 p.m., Armando's vehicle was picked up leaving Arden Villas. The final and eerie image of her walking into her apartment that afternoon was now deeply unsettling, given what police now knew she walked into. Her mom said she would scream at the picture, willing her to not go in, and wishing that something could have distracted her or made her turn around. On September 27th, police had enough to arrest Armando on suspected burglary charges. They now knew there was more to this, they just didn't have enough yet to make that charge. But before the arrest could take place, an unexpected call would be made, one that would shock everyone and change the course of everything. 27-year-old Armando Caballero had taken his own life. This was all unraveling very quickly, and with Armando now gone, there was a worry that they would never be able to find Mia or reach any kind of conclusion. The search had to continue, mainly using Armando's phone data, and it was through this that they were able to start getting some answers. At 7:01 p.m., about 2 hours after Mia was last seen, Armando had logged a maintenance call, a call from Mia's unit, a call which was quickly determined to be totally fake and had not been requested by Mia or her roommates. At 7:11 p.m., just 10 minutes later, Armando contacted the apartment office staff and asked to be let in at the complex gates. And then, 5 minutes later, Mia's own key fob was swiped at her unit, but no one entered. They could not say for sure that this was Armando, but they knew it definitely was not Mia. A short time then passed, and then at 7:40 p.m., Armando left the complex again in his car. More analysis of his phone showed that on the evening Mia went missing, he was near Timbascan, a place he used to live. On that day, he had stayed there for 20 minutes before leaving. There were a lot of abandoned homes and boarded-up buildings in the area, and residents said it always felt really unsafe and scary. If Armando used to live there, why did he need to go back? And for only 20 minutes. Part of his old apartment complex was now totally derelict, and there was a big wooded area surrounding it. The searches have been huge and covered miles and miles, but they now felt they had a place to focus on. They moved their search efforts over there, and the FBI were now involved too. Family and friends were still praying that she was alive somewhere. Although it wasn't looking good, they still had hope and were clinging on to everything they could. Saturday, October 2nd, 2021. After a week of searching, an awful discovery was made about 18 miles from Arden Villas in an abandoned part of Timbascan Apartments. They had found a body. Mia was found bound with black duct tape on her hands and feet, and her mouth was covered with tape too. She was wearing jeans, her bra, and a robe. Her bag was located nearby, and inside it was the shirt she was last seen wearing and her ID. An autopsy would later confirm that she had died by homicide by undetermined means, but due to decomposition, they couldn't determine anything else. The report also noted no identifiable evidence of trauma and no evidence of sexual assault. And testing from where Armando's body was found would come back to, and it confirmed the presence of Mia's blood and hair. The same black duct tape that was found around Mia's body was also found in his car. They also determined that 2 marks on his finger were consistent with bite marks, and he had more marks on his body that showed he was involved with the struggle very recently. As quick as everything had happened, it had now suddenly all come to a painful end, but no one had any answers. What happened in her apartment that day will now never ever be known, and any chance of closure has been lost forever. Other residents of her apartment complex were horrified, especially as they had been logging safety concerns for ages. What happened to Mia was everyone's worst nightmare, and they all felt let down in a lot of ways. One resident said it was just creepy, and the fact that maintenance people have access to our apartments and we just got these key fobs last month. If these key fobs weren't introduced last month, no one would have went into her apartment. If you really think about it, people who are living in apartment complexes are going to sleep at night not knowing that there is someone who has free access to their apartment, the Marcano's lawyer added. On October 15th, Mia was laid to rest at a funeral, which over 2,000 people would turn up for and thousands of others would tune into the live stream of. The aftermath of this case was massive and a lot of action was taken in various ways. 2 deputies that had worked on the investigation were found to have violated department policies. It was determined that Deputy Samir Paulino did not follow proper procedure when he went to investigate the apartment, and he failed to report certain details to his supervisors, such as the blood being found on the pillow or the jewelry being found broken. Due to these errors, Mia was logged as a voluntary missing person instead of a missing endangered person. And thus, the Criminal Investigations Division was not notified by him or his supervisor. Rick Raymond, a former police officer and now private investigator, said he thinks enough red flags should have been set off when it came to Armando turning up that morning. When you have multiple individuals, saying that item belongs to a missing individual and it is in this individual's vehicle, to me, that would have told me immediately I need to look at this guy, Rick said. But Sheriff Mina was quick to respond and said, "Remember that deputy didn't have all the information that we now have a week and a half later, so yes, all that takes time." He did acknowledge that more could have and should have been done though. In the case of Marcano's disappearance, managers in the responding deputy's chain of command recognized a lack of urgency on his part and asked that his role and the role of his corporal in the first hours of that incident. March 2022, the police released their final report on Tamia's disappearance and death. It was over 100 pages long and listed everything that they had on Armando Caballero and why he was and still is the only suspect in her case. Mia's family launched a wrongful death lawsuit against the apartment complex and another lawsuit against the Orange County Sheriff's Office, claiming the department handled her case carelessly and failed to treat her room as a crime scene. Arden Villas released a statement in response saying, "To ensure nothing like this happens again at Arden Villas, we are taking numerous proactive steps to enhance our security protocols. We are in the process of reviewing our entire security apparatus and will make changes or upgrades as warranted." They said that Armando was vetted through a national background check services provider and no records of burglary or sexual assault were found on him. Mia's family said that the apartment complex hadn't even acknowledged she was missing, hadn't reached out to them, and it took them several days to issue any kind of statement about not only someone that lived there, but someone that was their co-worker and friend too. The family is hoping that by pursuing this lawsuit, they can get answers to the numerous questions that remain unanswered and real change, said the Marcano's attorney, Daryl Washington. He added that Mia's family believes that other people could have aided Armando in killing Mia, and he also criticized the department's handling of Mia's case. The Marcano family say they have not received any reports or records of the investigation by the sheriff's office. But Sheriff Mina said the investigation is still ongoing. Many residents started protests about Arden Villas and open letters were written to them, detailing just how unsafe the complex actually felt and how many issues there had been going back to long before Mia went missing. It highlighted a lack of cameras, a lack of security, bad lighting, and awful maintenance. And places like the parking lot had not a single camera and was very poorly lit. The lawsuit launched by Mia's family against Arden Villas was eventually settled. In honor of what would have been her 20th birthday, the late teen was honored in a special way with her family getting a key to the city of Pembroke Pines. Her birthday would also be officially named Mia Marcano Day. In June 2022, Mia's Law, also known as Senate Bill 898, was signed into law. It states that property owners must conduct a background check of any potential employees. People with a violent criminal history or anyone listed as a sexual offender or predator will not be eligible. And additionally, a log will need to be kept, tracking each unit's set of keys. And if maintenance does need to access a unit, they need to give the tenant a 24-hour notice period instead of the previously required 12 hours. Her family set up the Mia Marcano Foundation, and their mission is to support, educate, and provide resources to families of missing persons, while advocating for the protection of students and the most vulnerable. They often help support in searches for other missing people too, and offer support to families going through what they did. They also set up the MMF Safe and Secure Accreditation Program. MMF aims to assist with ensuring that apartment complexes and multi-unit dwellings are as safe as possible and provides professional development for staff. They have made a lot of much-needed changes and are working tirelessly to carry on making those changes. When Mia Marcano booked her flight home to see her family on September 24, 2021, it was nothing but a totally standard and normal visit. What happened so quickly over such a short period of time will forever haunt everyone that knew her. There are still so many questions and no one is around to answer them. Her Aunt Pia said, "You can never take time for granted and life really is too short." Talking about Mia in the past, "I always thought I had forever," she said. Mia's brother said nothing good that happens to him will ever give him pure happiness. No matter how amazing it is, he's reminded that he can't call his sister to tell her and she can't be there to celebrate with him. Yima, Mia's mom, said, "For everyone else, life goes on. But I'm still here trying to figure this puzzle out. Will I ever finish this puzzle? I don't know. I think about her every day, every hour, every minute. She's everywhere. Her presence is everywhere. Every day I look at her pictures, but eventually that's it. There are no more pictures to be made. There are no more memories. Her pictures are going to fade, just like everything else. She'll be forever 19. Somaya was a bright and hardworking young woman pursuing a degree in biomedical science at Leeds Beckett University. Alongside her studies, she worked part-time as a carer for the elderly and disabled, a job she deeply cherished. She shared on social media, "I was not sure what path to take as I have no prior experience in care, but since joining, I'm having the time of my life. The management are so supportive and encouraging. Overall, I'm ecstatic to be a part of this team." Somaya was a quiet and reserved individual, described by neighbors as keeping to herself. However, she excelled academically, passing her first year with excellent marks and demonstrating remarkable dedication and skill in her studies. After enduring years of personal hardship, her life finally seemed to be improving. Somaya came from a large but fractured family, torn apart by a long-standing feud. At just 16 years old, she made the courageous decision to approach the authorities after her parents promised her in marriage to a cousin in Pakistan, a union she did not want. Her father, Yassine, had threatened her with violence if she refused, prompting her to seek help. On September 7, 2020, a forced marriage protection order was issued, safeguarding her and her siblings. The order prevented her from being forced into marriage, from being taken out of the country, and provided a pathway for her return if taken abroad. Following this, all the children were removed from the family home. Somaya eventually moved to a house on Binney Street, where she lived with her paternal grandmother and uncle, Dawood Khan. Moving out and living at 32, Binney Street gave Somaya the freedom and independence she wanted now that she was away from Yassine. She could eat what she wanted, dress in the clothes that she liked, see her friends as she pleased, and watch what she wanted on television. One of her relatives would later say that she had actually been homeschooled for several years and forbidden from going to university. Living here meant she was also free to continue her education. The June 25, 2022, Somaya had been on a late shift at work and was captured on CCTV walking home at 4 minutes past midnight. As morning came, it was a normal day in Bradford. At 3:35 p.m., Somaya sent a message to one of her closest friends. The friend later replied at 4:40 p.m., sending Somaya of a video of rain out of the window. She sent the message on WhatsApp, but it didn't deliver. Her friend didn't think too much of it, believing that maybe Somaya's phone battery had died. But her friend grew more concerned as time went on and sent another message to Somaya saying, "Can you text me when you get this, please?" But she still heard nothing. The following day, she contacted Somaya's family to see if they had heard from her, and she was told that a missing persons report had already been filed. When Somaya's uncle Dawood had got back to the house on the day Somaya had last been seen, he said the front door was unlocked, which was very unusual. Upon entering the property, he found Somaya's uncle and his brother, Muhammad Taraz Khan, in the house at 6:30 p.m. He asked him what he was doing there, as Muhammad was not actually allowed to be at the house as he had found out that she had been contacting boys. A restraining order had also been taken out in 2016 to prevent Muhammad from having any contact with his mother or going to her house, 32 Binney Street. The hours ticked by, but there was nothing from Somaya. This was very unusual for her. Whenever she went out, she would always be sure to tell Dawood and her grandmother where she was going and for how long she would be gone. Dawood began calling her and left her a message, as did her aunt, but there was still no response from her. As the panic really started to set in, Dawood again tried contacting his niece. At 11 minutes past midnight, her aunt also called her again, but still could not get a response. The calls to Somaya's phone carried on throughout the morning afternoon. At 1:15 p.m., Dawood reported her as missing to the police. West Yorkshire police attempted to make contact with her and called her phone several times, but just like everyone else, they too got no response and their calls went straight to voicemail. They also attempted to contact her uncle Muhammad, who had been at the house that day, but he too was not responding. Also, that day officers were out on patrol, and at 5:44 p.m., the message came through that there was a high-risk missing person that they needed to begin looking for. They were asked to go to a shipping container at 1A Cartergate Works, where 53-year-old Muhammad had lived since November 2021. As they arrived at his address, he was hanging his washing out and waved at them as they drove past. The unit he lived in was small and compact, 30 feet long and 9 feet wide, with another unit stacked on top of it. Parked outside was his Mitsubishi space wagon. The officers asked him why he had failed to respond to numerous calls the police had made to him. He said he had just been busy. He also said that he had been to Binney Street the day before to give his mother some fruit, arriving at the house at around 2 p.m. The door was locked, so he had called Somaya to get her to unlock and open the door for him. He said that Somaya was not in the living room when he left, and that he didn't see her. As the search for Somaya continued, the police began tracing the movements of her uncle Muhammad. And after trawling through the surveillance footage, Muhammad was seen on CCTV at 1:52 p.m., arriving on Binney Street on June 25th. One of the officers from West Yorkshire Police was tasked with listening to the audio from the CCTV cameras on Binney Street. The officer was able to hear a male voice saying, "Get thee out of my face," and then, "I'm coming back." Footsteps and running could be heard before the man said, "Come back, come here." The female voice could then be heard saying, "Lock the door." This wasn't the only concerning evidence they had found. They had observed Muhammad's car later driving around. He had parked on Mill Lane and removed what appeared to be a large and heavy item from his car before dragging it away. At 5 p.m. on June 27th, Muhammad Khan was arrested on suspicion of kidnap. When the officers questioned him, he was quick to say that he had a bad memory. But in spite of the severity of the allegation against him, he appeared to be very relaxed. He said that his relationship with his niece was generally good. As the officers continued to talk to him, at 7:30 p.m. that day, other officers went to 32 Binney Street to conduct a search and take photographs of the property. Later that evening, they went to 1A Cartergate Works, where Muhammad lived, to take pictures too. The officers continued taking more photographs the following day, and they found a smoldering bin by the side of his unit. It contained a partially burnt mobile phone, which was taken away to be examined and analyzed. It was later found to be Somaya's. Muhammad was interviewed again on the June 28th at 14 minutes past midnight at Trafalgar House Police Station. He was asked again about Somaya's disappearance, but he provided no answers. The officers asked him if he really wanted to help find his niece. His response, "I've given my statement, and there's no further comment." He was interviewed later again that day at 5 o'clock and 7 seconds p.m. He reiterated he did not know where she was, and his lawyer told him he should make no further comments. The officers asked him about going to Binney Street despite the restraining order barring him from doing so. He said he had a good reason for going there, but refused to elaborate any further and answered no comment to all remaining questions. The magistrate granted the police a further 36 hours to question him, but they would later release him under investigation. On the July 1st, investigators were back at Binney Street, and it was then that they found something that caught their eye. On a red metal table and the underside of the carpet in the living room, they found bloodstains. They were swabbed and sent away to be analyzed. They later came back as a match to Somaya. The officers continued to look at Muhammad and his movements on the day she had last been seen. On the June 25th, he was captured on CCTV footage having a key cut for the house on Binney Street, giving him the ability to let himself in. Again, this was a property that a restraining order stopped him from visiting. At 3:49 that day, he was back at Binney Street. CCTV recorded the raised voices of a man and a woman. It was also around this time that there was no more activity on Somaya's phone. Phone data showed that he had made internet searches to look for big rubble sacks. CCTV footage from the shipping container where he lived showed him reversing his Mitsubishi space wagon towards a container and locking it. The angle of the door blocked whatever it was he was doing from the view of the camera, but he was also wearing gloves. 11 days after she was reported missing, the discovery that people had been dreading was made. Somaya's body was found, tied up in a carpet and dumped on waste ground, left to decompose in the summer heat. Post-mortem was carried out. It was discovered that a 4-inch metal spike was lodged in her back. Her lung had been punctured as a result. The pathologist said that this was not in and of itself an immediate life-threatening injury if one were to seek medical assistance. But if someone failed to seek medical attention, it could be fatal, mainly due to the risk of infection. The pathologist said she was satisfied that there was evidence of the level of decomposition, especially around her head and neck, but the police said she had been subjected to a vicious and sustained attack. The news was devastating, and many people were affected. The head of her course at Leeds Beckett University paid tribute to her, saying she was a dedicated student who was well liked by her peers and tutors. On the July 6th at 9:10 p.m., officers arrived at Muhammad's address, and he was rearrested, this time on suspicion of murder. It was now his 6th time being interviewed by the police, beginning of 4:41 p.m. on July 7th. He was told that the previous day the police had found the badly decomposing body of a woman, and although they were yet to identify her, they strongly believed it was Somaya they had found. He said he had no clue what they were talking about, and when asked if he was the one responsible for her death, he replied, "Definitely not." He was asked about his movements on the day she had last been seen, and said he had just been driving around with nowhere to go in mind, as he simply enjoyed driving. The officers asked if he had been driving around to try and find a place to dispose of Somaya's body. This was something he denied. Why had he parked so close to where her body would ultimately be found? He said it was a free country and he could park there if he wanted to, saying it bore no relevance that she would later be discovered there. Why had her phone also been found burning in a bin next to his unit? That could just be a coincidence, he said. He said he was really upset at the thought of a family member being treated in this way, explaining that he wasn't violent and he believed most people would describe him as a fantastic person. They questioned him as to why he had had a key cut to the property, and he told them it was because his mother had just had a heart attack and it was not so he could go back to the house to remove Somaya's body. His 7th and final interview was conducted at 1:04 p.m. on July 8th. The officers played him the CCTV footage, and once again, he had no comment to make. He was asked about the CCTV footage that showed him removing something heavy from his car. He said, "It was just rubbish. All I know is this is a rubbish tip, so I thought it would be a good place to tip some rubbish," he said. He was quizzed about the metal spike that had been found lodged in Somaya's body, but he said he didn't know what it was. He told the police he thought they were obsessed with trying to put the blame on somebody to make it look like they had been doing their job, adding that he felt he was being forced to take the blame for something that he hadn't done. His protestations of innocence made no difference. He was charged with murder and remanded in custody. He would later appear in Crown Court on September 20th via a video link from HMP Leeds to enter his plea. When asked what his plea was, he replied, "Not guilty, ma'am." He denied the charge of murder, but he did admit to perverting the course of justice and disposing of her body, as well as trying to destroy her phone. At Bradford Crown Court, Mohammed Taruz Khan went on trial with Mr. Justice Garnham presiding. Prosecutor Jason Pitta said Somaya had met a traumatic death following a violent attack at her home. He said that her body was dumped and left to rot and decompose on wasteland like rubbish, such that she was not recognizable. His previous statements that he knew nothing about her death would later change in court. Mohammed's lawyer said that his client had been summoned to Binney Street to dispose of her body, adding, he knew nothing about the death until after Somaya had been killed. Mohammed did not give evidence during the trial, and the prosecution said, "We say the proper inference to that is because he simply cannot answer because he is guilty." In terms of what Mohammed's motive could have been, it was put forward that this was a so-called honor-based killing, rooted in the fact that Somaya had allegedly brought shame upon the family by refusing the marriage in Pakistan. Muhammad's lawyer said that his client would have no motive to kill Somaya and said that his brother, Somaya's father Yasin, would have a motive. Somaya's aunt said that Yasin had been humiliated and incandescent with rage after Somaya had reported him to the police over the forced marriage. But Yasin would not be there for the trial to hear any of this, as on the January 8th, he had gone to Pakistan on a one-way ticket after entering into an Islamic divorce with his wife. Muhammad's lawyer said Yasin was completely controlling and cruel to his daughter Somaya. Her life must have been a living hell, a hell that was created by her father. But the prosecution were fighting back, arguing that Muhammad was not only responsible for disposing of her body, which he now admitted to, they were putting forward their evidence that he had killed her. The CCTV footage, the raised voices on said footage, him having the key cut, and the last communication on her phone, the prosecution said, whilst the prosecution cannot say precisely when Somaya was killed, you can conclude that something significant had happened around or shortly after that point because there was no apparent further communication between Somaya and anyone else after that time. This coincided with her uncle arriving at the house. A detective constable would also testify he had been in an interview room with Muhammad on the June 29th. He said that Muhammad asked me what the sentence for someone in his position was. I explained murder could carry a life sentence. He went on to ask what the sentence was for the lesser offense of slaughter. Again, I explained that that would be determined by a judge with the facts of the case taken into account. He asked if it was true you only serve half your sentence in prison. I said that would depend on the judge. The prosecutor said these are sophisticated questions for someone who is innocent. They are not questions of an innocent man. They are questions knowing what he had done. With all of the evidence put before them following the 10-day trial, the jury deliberated for 9.5 hours over the course of 3 days. They then reached their verdict. The argument that Muhammad had just disposed of her body and not been responsible for her murder was rejected by the jury. Muhammad Tariq Khan was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 25 years for the murder of his niece. He was also sentenced to 5 years in prison for perverting the course of justice, which he is to serve concurrently. Cries could be heard from the public gallery as the verdict was read out. Mr. Justice Garnham said, "It is not possible to identify a motive for dreadful attack by you. It is pure speculation to consider whether this murder was part of some appalling family agreement. All that matters for present purposes is that the jury have found you guilty of the heinous crime of murder." When considering the aggravating factors in the case, the judge referred to the unlawful, disrespectful disposal of Somaya's body as one of the most serious aspects, saying, "You showed absolutely no respect for the dead body of your niece." When Muhammad was sentenced, the judge told him he was going to be an old man by the time he could apply for parole. Muhammad Tariq Khan will be 78 years old when he can apply for parole. For the officers who had investigated, this finally brought some closure to this appalling case. Fatima Patel, a family friend, spoke on behalf of Somaya's family outside court. She said, "Their emotions are still all over the place. They're still grieving, but there is some kind of closure for them. All they want to do now is live on in Somaya's memories and unfortunately continue in the grieving process." Following Muhammad's sentence, it was announced that a challenge to it had been made. It was argued that it was unduly lenient and should be increased. This appeal went to the Attorney General, who disagreed and said the sentence was not unduly lenient, and therefore it would not go before the Court of Appeal and the original sentence would stand. The outpouring of anger and shock following the murder of Somaya Begum was huge. Neighbors and local residents had been leaving flowers outside of the property, and the local councillor said that the community had been deeply affected by what had happened. Neighbors on Binney Street said that Dawood had been left so traumatized by what had happened to his niece, he was unable to go back to the property following her death. Somaya Begum was 20 years old and had her whole life in front of her. She had shown tremendous courage and bravery in going to the authorities, and had only just found the independence and freedom that she had fought so hard for. Afrikasim, the CEO and founder of Savara UK, another charity working to end so-called honor-based abuse and violence, explained so eloquently why, in the wake of Somaya's death, this vital work must continue. The details of Somaya's death are harrowing. Somaya was a bright, brave woman who had the right to live freely without fear. Today we remember her as the smart, Courageous student she was while renewing our pledge to end honor-based abuse and harmful practices. We must be clear that honor-based abuse and harmful practices are not a part of culture or any religion, but violations of human rights. Culture is something beautiful to be celebrated and is not an excuse for abuse. Our thoughts go out to those affected by Somaya's death, including her courageous family members who gave evidence during the trial. In her memory and in the memory of everyone lost to honor-based abuse, we will continue vital work to safeguard and advocate for those at risk and campaign to end honor-based abuse and harmful practices for good. This case takes us to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where 26-year-old Amara Banks, known to everyone as Jerica, lived with her 3 children: Zania, aged 5, Kamaria, aged 4, and Arzel Jr., affectionately called Zell, who was 21 months old. Jerica shared 2 of her children, Zania and Zell, with her ex-partner Arzel Ivory. Although the 2 lived separately, Arzel often visited to see the children and take them to daycare. Jerica came from a large, close-knit family with 5 siblings. Her brother David described her as a devoted mother whose life revolved around her children. She worked tirelessly to ensure they had everything they could want or need, often putting her own needs aside. In addition to being a dedicated mother, Jerica was talented and passionate about music. A graduate of art school with honors, she played the violin beautifully. Over the past few years, she had focused on gaining independence, working hard to distance herself from Arzel, who had expressed a desire to marry her. Jerica, however, felt the relationship was no longer romantic and limited their interactions to co-parenting discussions. Determined to create a fresh start for herself and her children, Jerica took extra shifts in the laundry room at a local hospital, saving every penny to secure a new apartment. Her daughters, Zania and Kamaria, were described as curious and mischievous, sharing an inseparable bond. They loved dressing alike and sharing everything, highlighting the tight-knit relationship within their little family. David said they were 2 peas in a pod. Sometimes you almost thought they were twins. Zell was always giggling and his sisters loved playing with him and carrying him around. But no sooner had she started on this new journey with her babies, tragedy hit Jerica and her family in a huge and unexpected way. Her son, Zell, passed away just short of his 2nd birthday due to complications of bronchitis. Jerica was inconsolable, but she threw everything she had into making sure he had the best send-off she could give him. She even set up a fund to help her pay for a Lion King-themed funeral for him. On February 7th, 2020, Zell's funeral was held. After the day was over, Jerica and her 2 daughters went back to Jerica's sister's house. Jerica had some wine and asked her sister Mika to drop her and the girls home. The family made plans to get brunch together the day, and Jerica said she would pick up her car at the same time. The 3 of them got back to the apartment at the 59100 block of North Sherman Boulevard in the early hours of the morning on what was now February 8th, 2020. Just after 1:30 a.m., the silence of the apartment block was abruptly and chillingly broken. A resident heard and then saw a woman running through the parking lot. She had no shoes on and was bleeding from her mouth. She was screaming for whoever was chasing her not to kill her. Then she was gone and it went silent. Little did they know it was Jerica. Another neighbor also heard shouting at 1:51 a.m. She lived next door to Jerica and had heard thumping sounds against the wall. She said it sounded like someone being slammed against the wall or their head being smashed against it. She too had seen Jerica barefoot and shouting, and as she looked out of her window, she saw a man following her and drag her back inside, slamming the door behind them. 911 were called. On the phone, the neighbor said, "You can hear her screaming, you can hear it through the walls. I just need somebody to come check on her. He's over there beating the hell out of this girl." Police were at the apartment just 9 minutes later, but could not locate where the 911 call had come from. A couple of officers drove through the complex with their windows rolled down and then parked up for 10 minutes to watch. They said they couldn't see or hear anything that was indicative of an argument or domestic disturbance, and they drove away. The operator that had taken the call had classified it as a priority 2 call, which does not require an immediate response. The dispatcher did not pass on that the caller was living next door to where the noise was coming from, hence the reason nothing could be tracked when the officers arrived. A decision which multiple officials would later admit was completely the wrong thing to do. As the hours passed and brunch was coming up, Jerica's family were messaging and calling her, firstly to check on her and the girls, but also to see if the plans were still on. She was not answering the phone to anyone. Valeria, Jerica's mom, said her daughter was a creature of habit. You always knew where she was and what she was doing. She had a clockwork routine, so they all knew in their guts that something was wrong. Even with everything that had just happened, she would not have dropped off the radar. You just know when you know, and her family wasted no time filling out a missing persons report. Police were then finally able to determine that the call that had been made in the early hours of the morning was actually about Jerica. They entered her apartment to look around. There were no signs of a forced entry, but there was also no trace of her or her daughters anywhere, and all of their belongings were still there. They spotted a large hole in one of the bedroom walls. The comforter on one of the beds was missing, and they also found a napkin with what looked like drops of blood on it. But they said apart from this, nothing looked disturbed. Investigators soon determined that there had been no activity on her phone or social media account since she was dropped home that night, an immediate red flag for most people. Mika, Jerica's sister who had driven her and the girls home that morning, said, "My sister, this is not like her. She don't run off, she don't ignore people. No matter what she goes through, she's gonna reach out to me." While her family and friends started searching and calling anyone and everyone they could think of, police managed to make contact with 25-year-old Arzel, Jerica's ex. It was now about 24 hours after Jerica was dropped home. Arzel told detectives that when he last spoke to her, she was, understandably, very upset about the funeral, and he had stayed for a while in her apartment before a fight broke out between them. He told her he wanted to sleep in his truck rather than the apartment, and Jerica had gone outside shouting about it. He had to coax her back inside, he said. Arzel said the fight had then subsided, and he did head out to his truck to sleep before going to work the next day. He hadn't heard from her since. He said he had no idea where any of them could be, but added that he was going out of state for work and could talk to them properly the following week, but couldn't do anything for them right now. They found his reaction odd, and given the fact he worked as a local security guard, it seemed strange that he would suddenly be leaving to work 100 miles away to then drive all the way back. They were now wondering if this could be a case of abduction, and these alerts are activated in the most serious endangered missing or child abduction cases. The aim is to instantly alert the community to assist in the search, and this is all broadcast through radio, TV, road signs, and cell phones. However, the problem was Amber Alerts are normally a very quick response and call to make. But in this instance, it had now been almost a week since the girls had been seen. Given the fact that most Amber Alerts are resolved within hours because the response time is that prompt, and there are many eyes and ears on it, it was not looking good. So much time had already been lost. Police Chief Alfonso Morales defended this decision, saying, "There is a criteria that goes for an Amber Alert for us to issue that. You have to understand that foul play was not an initial part of this investigation." He also said that Milwaukee police are only required to publicize information or photos if the missing person meets a narrow set of criteria related to age, health conditions, and mental state. He added that they were working relentlessly to find the three of them and would not stop until they did. Given that everything had just ramped up, officers returned to Jerica's apartment, this time with a cadaver dog. And in the girl's bedroom, the dog reacted very quickly. Forensic investigators then found the presence of human blood inside the girl's closet. In another room, the cadaver dog led investigators to a particular piece of carpet. When they pulled it up, they saw the floor underneath was absolutely covered in blood. It then became more obvious that a cleanup had been attempted and vast amounts of bleach were found all over. Given everything that the neighbors had reported hearing that night, coupled with what they had just found in the apartment, situation was far more concerning than they had initially thought. The search had now been on for almost a week when police received a call from none other than Arzel's father. He lived in Memphis and said Arzel had just called him from there. This was 600 miles away from Milwaukee. During the phone call, his son had calmly confessed to killing Jerica, Kamaria, and Zania before buying a gun and setting off to Memphis to start a new life. Memphis authorities contacted Milwaukee police and a warrant was issued for Arzel's arrest and extradition, but they had no clue where the three were. When they finally caught up to him in Memphis, he was charged with aggravated battery. He was still pretty calm and told detectives what his dad said was true, and he would tell them what happened and where they could find the bodies. In a garage behind an apartment building in the 47th block of West Burleigh Street, close to where he had lived, police found the charred bodies of Jerica, Zania, and Kamaria. There had been an attempt to dismember them. They had all been set on fire after they were dead. Autopsies would later confirm that all three had been strangled. Arzal Ivory's charges were immediately upgraded to 3 counts of intentional homicide and 1 count of aggravated battery. There was not yet any indication of how he would plead. Valerius said that if it wasn't for his father turning him in, they might never have known what had happened. It was a devastating outcome. Police said that between 2018 and 2020 domestic violence-related deaths had increased by 400%. And this particular case further highlighted that more support and resources needed to be put in place. Jerica and all her children were now gone, for lives lost in the space of a month. The knock-on effect to so many was huge. A GoFundMe was set up to help cover the funeral costs, with the Milwaukee mayor calling the case horrific. He said, as a parent, as a person, you just have to be shocked by the brutality of it. During an interview, he gave police the grisly timeline of what had happened. He said since the pair lost their baby son, the couple's relationship had really broken down. And more than that, he said Jerica had blamed him for the death of Zell. Zell had been born with severe respiratory issues, a constant concern for Jerica. He was even scheduled to have surgery to remove his tonsils to help with his breathing. Azel had tried to drop him at daycare, but they would not take him because he was too sick. He would not eat any food either that day or take his medicine. Arzal had tried to wake him up from a nap, but said he wasn't moving and was making weird gasping sounds. Instead of calling 911 or Jerica, he waited more than an hour before putting a now almost unconscious Zell in the car and going to pick up the girls from daycare. By the time he arrived, baby Zell had slumped to his side, lying against the door. Arzal said he drove around some more, unsure as to what to do. He stopped to buy some snacks, and it was only after this did he go to the hospital. But it was too late. Nurses said Zell was blue and unresponsive, and they could not find a pulse. It had now been 2.5 hours since Arzal had noticed he had stopped breathing properly. And at 5:17 p.m., just months short of his 2nd birthday, he was pronounced dead. Jerica was as angry as she was upset and said she could never forgive him for not doing something and just ignoring what was happening to their baby. Her family agreed and would later say he took 4 family members' lives, not 3. At Zell's funeral, Jerica had been very selective about who she wanted to speak and had asked her mother Valeria to give a speech. As she went to stand up, Arcel hurried to the front and just started talking. Jerica did not react as she knew it wasn't the right time, but her family said she was absolutely livid that he could even stand up there, let alone talk. After the funeral, Arzal said he went to work, and when he went to Jerica's apartment at 1:30 a.m., she was angry and upset. She had shouted at him that he did not care about Zell and had caused his death, and told him she couldn't even face looking at him. Arzal told officers she was just making a scene. He claimed she got a knife and cut his wrist, and then he had grabbed her and slammed her head into the wall twice. This was the hole that police had first spotted when they went in and what the neighbor had heard happening through the wall. She had started bleeding from her mouth and made an attempt to escape, but he dragged her back into the apartment and proceeded to strangle her with both hands. He coldly said it seemed that Jerica was not fighting him back, so he figured that she wanted to die and he was just helping her with this. He told detectives that he didn't want the children to live without their mother, so he had to kill them too. He kissed both girls and told them Daddy loves you and that Mommy wanted them in heaven with her before strangling them as well. He had planned to dismember all 3 of them but changed his mind after he saw a bone, likely where the pool of blood came from. He then wrapped their bodies up and took them to his car. While he was driving around Milwaukee wondering what to do, he remembered that his old apartment building had a 4-car garage and one of the locks was broken. He headed there to hide their bodies and tried to light them on fire, but the flames did not appear hot enough, so he went into a gas station for some gasoline, returned to the garage, poured it everywhere, and set it alight. He then bought the gun and fled to Memphis. The sheer calmness in the way he described doing this was quite staggering to the officers. Arzal said that it was his family, and as he had brought his children into the world, he could take them out of it if he wanted. Despite his shocking admission, he still pleaded not guilty and was held on a $750,000 bond. He then changed his plea to not guilty by reason of mental illness. But after many assessments in September 2020, a doctor ruled there was not enough evidence to support this and it was thrown out as a defense. So in April 2021, Arzal Ivory changed his plea again to guilty of 3 counts of first-degree intentional homicide. Under state law, he faced a mandatory life sentence, and the only question for the judge was whether he should ever be allowed to petition for release on extended supervision. His attorney detailed Arzal's schizophrenia diagnosis and past attempts to take his own life and requested the judge allow him to petition for extended supervision after serving 40 years in prison. Before his sentence was handed down, Arzal said, "Many of Jerica's family members gave victim impact statements in court, including her brother David and mother Valeria." Arzal's attorney's request of the possibility of an early release after 40 years of confinement was denied by the judge. She also ordered him to undergo mental health and drug abuse therapy. There were also so many questions about how the 911 call was initially handled and what, if anything, could have and should have been done differently. People questioned why it had taken so long for the media to become aware of the case too. The story had taken a while to start circulating, and that was only because Jerica's family were calling the stations and not forgetting the Amber Alert, which was issued a week after as well. When the media reached out to the police to inquire about the case, they were told it was not a critical missing persons case. The internal investigation found that the 911 dispatcher had missed out vital information when logging the call made by the neighbor, which had resulted in a lack of urgency to chase anything up. The operator resigned before the investigation was complete, and she took a job as a prosecutor in the Milwaukee County District Attorney's Office before resigning from that as well. Michael Brunson, the acting police chief of the area at the time, fired the 2 officers that went to the apartment that morning for failing to conduct a thorough and complete investigation at the time. The officers appealed and got their jobs back. The panel of commissioners then issued suspensions instead, 30 days for the more experienced officer and 15 days for the lesser. During the hearing, an attorney said, "In this case, these officers will never know what they might have been able to accomplish if they'd been given accurate information. Considering looking back at the day in question, could things have been handled differently?" "My answer is yes," one of the suspended officers said. The other one added, "I've played the what-if game inside my head many times since this incident, wondering if I could have done anything that could have changed the outcome of what happened. This is something I must live with." On Jerica's last day, she was enduring the pain of losing her baby boy, who she said had such a painful and poorly short life, no matter how much she tried to help him. And just a few hours later, she too was fighting for her life. And for Zania and Kamaria, who we will never know if they saw what happened to their mother, suffered an equally terrifying fate. The Banks family must live with a pain that is hard to comprehend. Mika, Jerica's sister, said she lives with so much guilt. "I gotta deal with it every day that I took her home, and now I will never see her again." In a touching tribute, the Banks family started working with the Sojourner Family Peace Center in Milwaukee. Sojourner is a non-profit organization that provides an array of support to nearly 8,000 people every year. They help families affected by domestic violence achieve safety, justice, and a brighter future. They made plans to commission a stained glass window to be installed there. The glass will depict Jerica, Zanaya, and Kamaria walking into the sunlight together. In the heart of central Georgia lies the city of Macon, where we meet 27-year-old Lauren Giddings. The eldest of 3 sisters, Sarah and Caitlin, Lauren was born to Karen and Bill Giddings in Maryland. The family was close-knit, but the true star among them was Lauren's beloved dog, Butterbean. Ambitious and driven, Lauren had long aspired to become a public defender. In the spring of 2008, she moved to Macon to pursue her dream. Known for its slow pace, welcoming atmosphere, and peaceful charm, Macon was a perfect fit for Lauren, and she quickly settled into her new life. At the time, Lauren was in a long-distance relationship with David Vandiver, a corporate lawyer she had met 4 years earlier at his Atlanta law firm. Despite their 20-year age difference, they shared a deep connection, similar work ethics, a quirky sense of humor, and a strong mutual support system. David described Lauren as outspoken, intelligent, and remarkably level-headed. Lauren even managed to win over David's protective older sister, something he said no one else had accomplished. David, meanwhile, had already chosen the perfect spot to propose to Lauren, though their relationship had faced challenges. The physical distance between them after her move strained their bond, and they briefly broke up. During that time, Lauren dated another law student, Joe, but quickly realized her heart was still with David. She ended things with Joe, who was upset but remained a good friend. By June 2011, Lauren had reached a major milestone, graduating from Mercer University's School of Law, one of the nation's oldest law schools. Her dog Butterbean, David, and her entire family were there to cheer her on. Ready to launch the next chapter of her life, Lauren was laser-focused on passing the Georgia bar exam, dedicating every spare moment to preparation. After graduation, she attended her sister Caitlin's wedding back in Maryland and told people after this she really needed time to knuckle down and focus on her work. The family all knew it was the last time they'd be together for a while, and this made Caitlin's big day even more special. Like many students after graduation, Lauren had opted to stay in Macon instead of going back to Baltimore. She lived on the second floor of the Barristers Hall Unit 2. Barristers Hall was a place built exclusively for law students, and it was situated directly across from the campus. Still being able to go in and talk to lecturers and use the library while she was studying for the bar just meant it made sense for her to stay there a while longer. Back at her apartment, though, her safe and quiet space soon felt very different. Lauren had spoken to her sister about something that she couldn't prove and knew sounded strange but was convinced was happening. She could feel things were being moved around, like someone was coming into her apartment. When she got home after being out, there was a weird energy she couldn't explain. She felt someone was watching her, but there had been no signs of a forced entry, so she had no idea how this could be happening. This uneasy feeling she had not subsided, and on June 25, 2011, late into the evening, she sent an email to David about her concerns. David told her not to worry and said it was probably just some hoodlums messing about, but not actually intent on doing anything. And she was working hard and not really leaving her apartment much, so it was possible she had been going a little stir-crazy without realizing. Lauren sent out a mass message which read in part, "Hey guys, I'm hunkering down to study for the bar. Please don't be offended if I don't respond to texts or emails." And in the following days, no one heard anything from her. Apart from going to church and making time for the occasional workout, she was doing little else apart from reading, so a few unanswered messages or phone calls was not something that was immediately alarming. But her best friend Katie and her sister Caitlin had repeatedly tried to check in with her, but were being met with silence. Caitlin was on her honeymoon and sharing photos, and it was strange that she wasn't replying to any of them. It didn't feel that she was just focusing on other things. Started to feel like something was wrong. A fellow student, Ashley, got a call from Caitlin asking her to stop by her apartment and check in. Before Ashley went, she tried calling her too, but Lauren's phone was now going straight to voicemail. Ashley and her boyfriend pulled up at her apartment and noted that Lauren's car was still parked outside. Using a spare key, they let themselves in. Lauren's belongings were sort of strewn everywhere, but this didn't seem that odd because she was due to move out and move in with David. But when they saw her calendar and realized the date, she was actually supposed to move out the very next day, June 30th. Then they found Lauren's purse, law books, cell phone, and laptop. Things everybody could agree she would never have just disappeared without taking. So where was she? Ashley called some friends and people she knew lived in the same complex. Even Lauren's ex Joe started searching the university, and everyone else was looking nearby. The consensus was the last time anyone had heard anything from her was at an end-of-year party 4 days ago. But she had left the morning after and everything was fine, and a few hours later she had emailed David talking about her worries being in the apartment. The following morning, with still no luck, it was time to call the police, and her family set off on the almost 12-hour drive to Georgia to help. At 9 a.m., officers got to number 2, the Barristers Hall. Right away, they noted that there were no signs of a forced entry, no signs of a struggle, and nothing seemed to have been stolen. But they could all agree that something was definitely wrong. They started combing through her rooms, and one of the first things they did was use a spray luminol to see if there were any traces of blood. Everything was coming up clean, but when they used it in Lauren's bathroom, the result was very different. Her bath had clearly been full of blood. Police believed they were now looking for Lauren's body. June 30th was a hot day with a strong breeze, and as they moved their search outside to form a new plan, a big gust of wind came along which forced a smell in their direction. They were stood near some bins, and a distinctive odor stopped them in their tracks. It was undoubtedly the smell of human decomposition. One officer said, "While we were standing there, the wind started to turn. We all smell things in life that smell bad. And that smell of a body or a decomposing body is one of the worst things you'll smell." Police opened the lids and made a grisly discovery that would stick with them forever. It was a female torso wrapped in a black bag. Testing needed to be done, but given the fact Lauren was missing and the luminol results from her bathroom, they strongly felt that it was a part of her body. I had never seen anything like that before. Who could have done this? Because truthfully, only a monster could do something like that. It was absolutely horrible, one detective said. In a weird twist of fate, the police cars being parked near the entrance had stopped the trash removal van from getting in to empty everything. If the police hadn't been there at that moment blocking things off, everything would have been gone by the time they'd started searching. As suspected, testing confirmed it was Lauren Giddings' torso. The chief medical examiner would later confirm that there were no signs of sexual assault but could not confirm a cause of death. They did believe she had been killed and dismembered on June 26. Lauren's apartment, especially the bathroom, was now being dusted for fingerprints and the likes. But it looked like there had been a pretty thorough cleanup done, and only luminol was picking anything up. They had cornered off everything outside and were trying to keep what they had found under wraps. If it was someone in the complex, they didn't want to alert them to the fact that they had just found her in case this caused anyone to run or hide more evidence. One officer said, "You have to look at who is closest to the victim, either romantically or geographically." The people involved in the initial search, Ashley, Joe, and the others, were all asked to come in and give statements. They also spoke with her partner David. But he was not only devastated, he had been away on a golfing trip in California and his alibi checked out. It was quite obvious that he was not at all involved. Lauren's ex, Joe, was much the same and was quickly ruled out. The authorities were keen to search every home in the block so they could start eliminating people. Everybody was happy to do this. Everybody apart from one person, 25-year-old Stephen McDaniel. So why would this be an issue? They wondered. "It's the lawyer in me. I'm just always protective of my space," he said. He was a fellow law student also prepping for the bar exam and had been living next door to Lawrence since the first year of law school. They continued to search the rest of the block but kept their eye on him. His behavior was looking odd. He was both refusing to help with anything but at the same time loitering around and making sure he was involved with everything. Stephen stayed there all day, watching everything everyone was doing and walking around after the police as they were in and out of other people's homes. He was raising eyebrows, even more so when the media started interviewing people. He was one of the first people to talk to them and gave his theories about what could have happened to Lauren. At this point, only a few people knew about what they had found in the bin. And after the interview was over, Stephen sat for ages just staring into space. A few hours later, he finally let the police into his apartment. He was stockpiling food, energy drinks, and lots of various weapons too. They looked through the drawers and found a variety of things, including some condoms. When police pulled them out, Stephen mumbled something about being a virgin and saving himself for marriage. He started talking to them about being on the dating site eHarmony, but said he wasn't having much luck with getting dates. He was acting so oddly, and when police asked why he had the condoms, he muttered something about breaking into 2 neighboring apartments and randomly deciding to steal them. With his own admission that he had been breaking into other people's homes, just feet away from where Lauren had lived, police arrested him for burglary and brought him in for further questioning. Although he had been keen to talk to the media and know everything that was going on, he was now totally silent. There were inconsistencies with what he was saying and he was reluctant to answer things. It was mainly yes, no, or I don't know. As well as this, his mannerisms were strange. Police said they hadn't seen anyone respond this way in an interview before. He sat almost perfectly still the whole way through, barely even moving his head, with officers having to ask him to look them in the eyes from time to time. The interview footage sped up highlights just how eerily still he sits and how unusual it looks in comparison to the officer's natural demeanor. Even when detectives left the room, he remained in the same position, staring straight ahead. His constant repeating of "no" and "I don't know" was now starting to grate on Detective Patterson. There was no doubt in his mind that this was the person behind the awful thing that had happened to Lauren. But it was now past midnight and they were no further forward in getting answers. Stephen also revealed he had 2 scratches just above his hip as well. As the interview progressed, Stephen's apartment was being turned upside down. Investigators found that he somehow had a master key to get into every room in the complex. They found the packaging for a hacksaw and several flash drives, which later turned out to have graphic and disturbing images and videos of children on them, and a pair of underwear that, once tested, came back to Lauren Giddings. A look into his search history showed he was often on her social media profiles, and he would be searching these at the same time he was looking up and watching violent pornography. They found he had written blogs about torturing and killing women too, sharing his depraved fantasies on forums. It was all disturbing, and given the amount of searches he had made for Lauren's name, he was clearly obsessed with her. And one of his last and latest searches was for Macon's trash collection times. It's all over anyways. In the maintenance room in the complex, they found the hacksaw that matched the packaging found in his apartment. There was blood on it. CCTV had confirmed it was him buying the hacksaw too. They also found a bloody sheet. Who was Stephen McDaniel, and why on earth had he done this? Classmates of Stephen said he was uncomfortable to be around. Very awkward and difficult to talk to. He would ask people weird things about death, fixating on a zombie apocalypse and committing the perfect murder. He would quiz people on how they would, hypothetically, kill someone and cover it up. In school, Stephen was actually voted most likely to be famous. His fellow law students said he definitely thought he was the smartest person in the room, smarter than everyone and arrogantly so. Always ready for a debate even if he was totally wrong. He would bicker with everyone, Lauren included. And other students said he was quite happy to disagree and argue. He wasn't there to make friends. That was clear, one person said. They, along with their teachers, said he was an average student. He wasn't someone that really stood out in any way, but he sure spoke like he did. Now he was finally coming to the end of his time at university, and he was unsure as to where to go next. He was finishing school with no friends and no future plans. He was somewhat adrift. From the minute they started living next door in 2008, Lauren had really tried hard to be his friend and be supportive. She even stopped to introduce him to her mother Karen when they saw he was hurriedly walking alone around the complex. Karen met him again on the eve of their graduation. There was something about him, she said. After she spoke to him for the second time, she couldn't help but think of him living next to Lauren. I thought it was odd that he always kept the windows and curtains closed. You never saw him, she said. But as nice as Lauren was trying to be, he had the same effect on her that he did on most people. He just made her feel uncomfortable. In an email that Lauren wrote to David in 2008, the same year she moved in, she spoke about Stephen's behavior and wrote about butting heads with him in class. She said, "Got the stink eye. He's out to get me." But Stephen had definitely taken a shine to Lauren and had asked her to go out on a date a few times. But as well as being in a relationship, she just wasn't interested in him like that. From this point on, she was only being polite if she saw him, but was definitely keeping her distance. With everything they had found, on August 2nd, 2011, Stephen McDaniel was charged with the murder of Lauren Giddings. He was also later charged with 7 counts of child sexual exploitation too. Despite his lawyers requesting his bail be set at $100,000, it was set at almost $1 million. A grand jury indicted him on 1 count of murder, and once all of his devices had finally been analyzed, 30 counts of child exploitation too. Although everything against him was really strong, the prosecution did note that it was still a largely circumstantial case. Apart from the underwear, there was nothing tying his DNA to her. Nothing of his was found in the bathroom, and none of his DNA was on the hacksaw either. In terms of the underwear, he could potentially explain it away as something he stole, just as he had done with the condoms. They still could not prove a cause or time of death either. But nonetheless, they were confident and ready to take him to trial. More evidence would soon be brought to their attention, which really did cement everything, and it was chilling to watch. On a memory card taken from his apartment, they found a video which proved that Stephen had been stalking Lauren for quite some time. Her feelings and worries about someone watching her and breaking in were not unfounded at all. On the same night Lauren was murdered, he had been filming her home through the window. He had taken a wooden pole which he had duct taped a camera to the end of, and then held the pole up to be able to see into her rooms through her blinds. Prosecutor David Cook said the second he saw this, he said, "That's the guy." A few days later, hundreds of people filled out the St. Mary of the Mills Church for Lauren's funeral. Despite the best efforts of everyone, it was still only her torso that had been recovered. So that was all they could bury that day. Stephen McDaniel pleaded not guilty, and the defense were preparing to position the idea that the police were framing him and had entered his apartment many times to plant things. In another twist, one of Stephen's defense attorneys who briefly worked with him had actually been one of Lauren's teachers in a transitionary course from law school into law practice. He said he had admired Lauren and enjoyed teaching her, but one thing he did remember was that she was opposed to the death penalty. So knowing that the prosecution were already pushing for this, he was pushing to throw it out. As everybody prepared for what would be a very tough trial, the prosecution agreed to drop the child sexual exploitation charges and offered him a plea deal. And this meant Stephen, with the advice of his lawyers, had a change of mind. In April 2014, just a week before the trial was due to start, Stephen McDaniel finally pleaded guilty to killing and dismembering Lauren. One of his old attorneys said, "The case took a turn for the worse for McDaniel when the computer evidence started coming out, and it just kept coming. They were continuing to find more and more evidence related to his computer and camera, and finally he agreed that was enough to get a conviction. Before he was set to be sentenced, the prosecution presented the evidence which attested to his character. They showed the recording of Lauren's home and read out some of Stephen's alleged forum posts, one of which read, "Graduate from law school. Party hard by drinking alone in front of my computer. See my sexy neighbor/classmate come home late. Invite her up for a nightcap. Make her a special drink called a Mickey Finn. A drink designed to knock someone unconscious. She's out cold. I finally lose my V-card. Oh no, she's OD'd and died. I barbecued her legs and arms to celebrate losing my V-card. Not into organ meat, but threw her torso out. Loses on TV while the cops are discovering her remains. You mad virgins." However, the legitimacy of this came into dispute, as some people claimed it was someone trolling online, and although the prosecution firmly believed it was him, it does remain up for discussion. As part of his plea deal, he had to admit to the court what he had done that day. And this was what he said happened. At around 4:30 a.m., he unlocked her door using the master key. He was wearing all black with gloves and a mask. He said he stood watching her sleep, but she must have felt something was wrong as she woke up abruptly. Before she could get out of bed or even process what was happening, he leaped onto her and put his hands around her throat. The pair struggled and fell onto the floor. He said Lauren grabbed his mask and pulled it off, and when she realized it was him, she called his name and screamed at him to stop. She cried and tried to fight him off for almost 15 minutes as he was strangling her before she ultimately stopped breathing. He dragged her into the bathroom and put her into the tub. He left her there for the rest of the night and following day. And on the evening of June 27th, he returned with some tools including a hacksaw and proceeded to dismember her, which he described in graphic detail. He put parts of her into different bags, which he said he dumped in bins around the university campus, but her torso he put into the bin next to the apartment block, thinking it would be taken shortly. He cut up his mask, gloves, and shirt and flushed them down the toilet. The medical examiner had revealed there were no signs of a sexual assault, and Stephen said he had not sexually assaulted Lauren. She was wearing pink running shorts when she died, and I never removed them. They were found on her torso just as I had left them, he told the court. Even though it had now been almost 3 years, people still couldn't believe it. Lauren had been nothing but friendly and kind to him from the second she met him, something Stephen acknowledged too. He claimed from that night on he was in a dreamlike delusional state and had convinced himself that Lauren was still alive. He said, "It's difficult for me to explain why I killed Lauren and attempted to conceal my deed the way I did. I know that it was very wrong. I am not delusional or without all morals or decency. Something in my makeup, my psychology, my neuropathy, my own particular pathology perhaps must explain it. He told the family he was sorry and grieves for Lauren every day but doesn't expect forgiveness from them. There is no way I can ever deserve it. If I could take back what happened, I would, he said. The only reason the prosecution did not end up seeking the death penalty was because Lauren herself was so against it. Her family respected that and said they hoped he lived a long life in the worst possible way in prison. Stephen McDaniel was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole until 2041. After he was sentenced from prison, he wrote a lengthy letter claiming he had been the victim of police intimidation and his case from the start had been unfair. He demanded a new and, in his eyes, fair trial. So 4 years later, he filed an appeal where he represented himself and called more than 10 people to be interviewed, including his old lawyer whom he was seeking damages against. In his complaint, Stephen asked the court to award damages from his lawyer in the amount of $50,000 for legal fees and another $250,000 in punitive damages for his lawyer's alleged negligence. He also filed a motion against Bibb County Judge Howard Sims claiming he had shown prejudice towards him. This appeal was denied. The now 37-year-old filed another appeal again in 2022 which claimed that the prosecution had stolen documents, his rights had been violated, and his lawyers were incompetent. He was requesting his conviction be overturned and he be released from prison. Stephen's dad Mark stood behind this and said, "We're hoping that the truth comes out. That's all we're hoping." But the judge said he could not even consider this appeal as he filed it over a year late. And this was also denied. Had McDaniel exercised reasonable diligence rather than blindly assuming the Georgia Supreme Court was to blame, he would have realized that his motion was untimely. The judge added, "Stephen has already filed another appeal and this is still ongoing." Some of Stephen's family and friends still believe he is innocent, and his dad even started a GoFundMe to help with his legal fees. But it raised nothing and the page was quickly removed. Lauren's sister Caitlin called it pathetic and delusional. His grandfather Hollis, before he died, gave an interview about visiting him in jail. He said, "If all this that the police have got is true, then I guess I'm a broken-hearted grandfather. You come in and he's just sitting there quiet and you can't get nothing out of him. You feel like picking him up and taking him to the doctor. But he's grown, he's not a little boy, so it just breaks your heart. You have to accept what is in front of you whether you like it or not. I did what I thought was right at the time to get him a lawyer immediately. I thought he'd go over there and pay his bail and then take him home. But my God, when I saw him, he just looked different." His mother Glenda defended him as well and seemed certain that at the time he was arrested he was innocent. "I have a big hug for him when he gets out and he has one for me," she said, adding that she has visions of him becoming a Supreme Court justice one day. But as far as the police, prosecution, and Lauren's family were concerned, the trial was over and the correct decision had been made all those years ago. Lauren's sister Caitlin said it seemed like she might have been one of the people who was actually nice to him and gave him some attention even though he might have been a loner. There's no story here about telling your kids to lock their car when they get in or don't go to this side of town. You know there's no. She shouldn't have done this and it wouldn't have happened. Because you should always be nice to people. You should always be nice to your neighbors. Just because someone looks different doesn't mean they are. But in this case, he just was. Detectives believe they stopped a serial killer in the making. A predator and a danger to children that day. Once voted most likely to become famous when he was younger, he is now infamous in one of the most shocking crimes the community had ever seen. The police praised Lauren's family and friends for being so quick, and they acknowledged that if the trash collection services had emptied the bin where her torso was located, the case may have gone cold and they might have never caught Stephen. Investigators also believe that Stephen has never been entirely truthful about what happened and there is more to the story. "I'm sure there are things he'll never tell anyone," said Detective David Patterson. Lauren's sister Sarah added, "Obviously we know she died, but we don't really believe anything Stephen McDaniel has said. I don't think he is a very honest person. I think he can make up a 1 million stories. He has a very vivid imagination." They continue to search for Lauren's remains, believing they might even be in a 62-acre area owned by one of Stephen's family members. Although he is eligible for parole in 2041, legal experts think he will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Lauren's family celebrate every milestone and every event she should have been there for. as if she is there and joining in. They also organize runs in her memory every year too. Her sister Caitlin named her baby girl Lauren Magnolia after her. May can have 2 memorial plaques dedicated to her, and these can be found at Mercer Law School and on a pink bench in Washington Park in Mercer's downtown district, somewhere she loved to run. Lauren's family also established the Lauren Teresa Giddings Scholarship. In the law firm where she briefly trained, Lauren was always known for wearing bright colors, especially pink. They even named Wednesdays Pink Wednesdays after her, joking that she was like Elle Woods from Legally Blonde. A close friend of hers said that her choice of color in a famously monochromatic working environment always made people smile, as well as started a conversation. She immersed herself in a profession that's known for black pinstripes. Pink was her way of saying bring it on to the world, she said. And friends said that summed Lauren Giddings up. She made herself hard to miss and was unapologetic about it. Driven, a go-getter and ready to take on anything that came her way, Caitlin said, "It's not like she doesn't exist in our lives. She does. It's just very different." For this case, we're in the small and sleepy village of Metamora, Ohio, home to 20-year-old Sierra Jargon, a student at the University of Toledo Junior College of Business. Sierra's family said she was hard to miss, always very loud, full of energy, and loved to perform and entertain. She was the firstborn and was followed by 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and was especially close to her mother, Sheila. Her mother said there was never a dull or quiet moment, and she was happy to make herself the butt of the joke to make everyone smile. She didn't ever take things too seriously, and friends joked that even as a teenager, she would do things like dance around the school in their cheerleading uniform, even though she wasn't on the team, just to get a laugh. And it was in high school, aged just 13, where she met Josh Kolodzinski. It was a case of young love and first love, but flash forward 7 years later, they were still together, stronger than ever, and were now talking about marriage after college. They shared the same love of sports, the outdoors, and loved traveling together. Josh joked that he didn't win many arguments. Sierra had a very strong personality, was fiercely independent and confident, and if she wanted to do something, it was pointless telling her no. Her Aunt Tara said, "She had a way of making everybody feel comfortable. Even a person who's an introvert and shy should bring that person out. You could take her anywhere and know she was going to make a friend." July 19th, 2016, 6:30 p.m. With all the winding country roads and lovely views, Metamora was the perfect place for Sierra and Josh to go on long walks and bike rides. Sheila had wanted her daughter to stay in that day and talk about plans for after college. But Sierra had just got a new purple bike, and with the lovely summer weather like this, she didn't want to sit inside. Sierra and Josh spent the afternoon together at his house, but it was now time for Sierra to head back. Josh took his motorcycle and Sierra was on her new bike. Josh filmed 2 videos of them and uploaded both to Snapchat at 6:43 p.m. It was about a 7-mile ride back to her mother's, and with just a couple of miles to go, Sierra told Josh she could turn around and head back. She could do the last bit by herself just fine. It was a gorgeous warm evening and still really light outside. Josh carried on alongside her for a few more minutes, but the ever-independent Sierra kept saying he should turn back and not worry about her. He finally agreed. They kissed and hugged goodbye, and Josh told her to text him when she got back. He stood and watched as she pedaled off into the distance along the cornfields. But the peace and calm would soon be shattered. Josh, at home and waiting for the message, started to get nervous as his phone remained silent. A few hours passed and he eventually called Sheila, but she was out at the time and assumed her daughter was either still with him or already at home. As the temperature dropped and the sun started to set, a wave of panic washed over everybody as they realized that all this time they had completely crossed wires. Sierra's phone was now going straight to voicemail. She had been wearing shorts, a neon-colored tank top, and her Fitbit and her bike was a distinctive bright color too. The problem was it was now really dark and there were miles and miles of cornfields along the route she had been going down. A daunting search lay ahead. If she was lying somewhere in a field, potentially hurt or having been in an accident, would they even be able to spot her? After an hour of driving around and calling her name, it was time for the police to get involved. They needed helicopters and dogs for this kind of area. At 11 p.m., A missing persons report was filed, and by 3 a.m., everybody was out looking for her, shining their torches around vast, dark fields, where everything looked the same for as far as the eye could see, was seeming really hopeless. But then, suddenly, they saw the light bounce back at them. Something was reflecting. It was Sierra's bike. On the ground nearby, they found some odd items, none of which were Sierra's. 2 pairs of sunglasses, a screwdriver, and a small fuse box. They also saw some tracks that looked to have come from a motorcycle. There were broken corn stalks, and some of the stalks had blood on them. There had clearly been the struggle, and it looked as though Sierra had been forced off the road. It was less than 500 feet from her home. They taped off everything coming in and out, and the FBI were called in too. One of the agents said, "It made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. You just had this eerie feeling that you knew that this was an abduction site." Given the fact that she was last with Josh and the motorcycle tracks were found, he was the first person to speak to, but he was immediately ruled out as a person of interest. He had proof he was at home and was absolutely riddled with anxiety, worry, and guilt about her doing the last bit by herself. Detectives started looking at her phone and Fitbit data instead, but there was really nothing to go off. A single ping from her phone pointed to a few miles from where her bike was found, and there didn't appear to be anything there. Detectives said they now had to consider the scary possibility that maybe she had been snatched as part of a sex trafficking ring. Areas just outside of Metamora had been known for cases like this, with young women being abducted and later found as far out as Las Vegas, thousands of miles away. And the concern was this was a rural and empty area with miles and miles of country road and not a single camera anywhere. If she had been abducted hours beforehand, she could be 100 of miles away by now with no technology to track her. As her family watched as the tapes started to cover the roads, police said they couldn't tell them anything. They were keeping what they had found near her bike under wraps, so all her family could do was carry on making calls to Sierra's friends, classmates, and the local hospital, praying that at some point someone would pick up and give them the answer they wanted. She was fine. Her phone battery had simply died, and everything could all be easily explained. Police then got a call from one of the locals. On the night Sierra had gone missing, he had been driving with his son when he spotted a black motorcycle helmet in the road. He thought nothing of it, but threw it into the back of the truck. Now he wondered if it could be connected. A closer look showed there was blood on the helmet, and it was sent away for testing. It was now 48 hours into the search, and an increased reward of $100,000 was being offered for any information. Investigators were going door to door, which in an area like this wasn't actually taking much time, due to the fact it was mainly farmhouses and not that many of them. They soon came across a dilapidated old property with a couple of barns attached sitting on an acre of land. It was home to 57-year-old James Worley, who ran a repair shop from there with his brother and until recently their late mother. James opened the door, and it was instantly obvious that this was an inconvenience for him, and he wasn't happy to stand around and chat. He was argumentative and abrasive. They asked him where he was on the night Sierra went missing, and, to their surprise, he admitted to being in that exact area. He said his motorbike had broken down, and it just so happened to be where Sierra's bike was. He said he debated on using it to get home, but decided against it and instead pushed his all the way back. He said on the way he dropped his helmet, his screwdriver, and the fuse box, but he definitely hadn't seen Sierra anywhere in that area. One detective said it was such a wild story that he had to stop his jaw from falling open. None of the items they found at the scene had been made public up until this point either. One thing was for sure though, he had just placed himself right at the very spot, and no matter how hard he tried to spin his reasoning for being there, it just didn't make sense. But this wasn't enough for them to get a search or arrest warrant, so they had to leave. James's neighbors had little good to say about him. He had a very intimidating presence and made people feel uncomfortable. He always paid close attention to younger girls, and families did not like their children playing near his home. One neighbor said, "You knew who he was and where he lived, but you didn't know anything about him. Just that something was strange." Back at the station, a background check on James gave them a good reason to get that search warrant. He had actually been released from prison in 1993 for abducting a cyclist called Robin Gardner. He was in his truck and forced her off the road about 20 miles from where Sierra had gone missing. He got out and acted like he was going to help her, but held a screwdriver to her throat and started dragging her into the truck, telling her he would kill her if she fought back. He hit her over the head and pulled handcuffs from his glove box. Unbelievably, she managed to jump out of the moving truck and was rescued by another driver. James was given a 10-year sentence, but he served just 3 years for this. This was too similar to what they believed had happened to Sierra, and he needed a revisit. Back at his house, they wanted to look around the barns. In the one furthest away from the house, they saw a green crate on the ground which had been covered by stacks of hay bales. Inside the crate was bags and bags of women's underwear and clothing which he had labeled up. Some had blood on them. James started to visibly panic, telling them it was too hot inside and everyone needed to leave to get fresh air. But they weren't going anywhere. As they looked closer, the walls of the barn had bloodstains on them. They found handcuffs, zip ties, rolls of duct tape, rope, weapons, and masks, more of which was later found in his truck. There were cameras hidden around the barn too, and a blood-stained mattress. A piece of plywood was stacked against the wall, and when they pulled it back, it was covering a hole in the ground. It was actually a freezer that had been buried in the ground. It was lined with a blood-stained carpet, and there was an intense smell of chemicals coming from inside it. This barn was, put simply, a torture chamber, a house of horrors. James' answer to all of this? At first he said the underwear and other things were probably left by an ex-girlfriend. Then he told them he was trying to set up a production company to shoot X-rated films, and this was his set. As the officers stared at him in disbelief, James blurted out, "I've been around the block. Would I leave any evidence whatsoever to be found?" There wasn't a chance that any of what he said or what they found was going to fly, and detectives placed him in handcuffs. They definitely now had probable cause, and he was arrested on suspicion of the abduction of Sierra. In the main house, they found a letter he had written to his court-appointed therapist saying he had learned a lesson from each abduction, and the next person he did it to, he would bury. A few miles from James' house, and just days after the search for Sierra had started, drones had picked up a mound of dirt in one of the cornfields. It looked like a freshly dug hole that had been covered over. Cadaver dogs reacted very quickly, and they just knew the search for Sierra Jargon had now come to a very sad end. She had been buried in a shallow grave, hogtied with her wrists handcuffed and her ankles tied with rope and bound to her hands. She was wearing a diaper and had died of asphyxiation over several minutes after choking to death on a plastic gag which was still inside her mouth. It had been forced in so hard it broke a tooth. The medical examiner said there was no evidence that they could see of a sexual assault. But one thing was for certain: the sheer brutality and indignity of what had happened to her was so heartbreaking, and investigators had to take a moment to compose themselves. As the phone rang Sierra's family late that night, Sheila said they all took a breath before Sierra's dad answered. The silence that filled the room was deafening. Sheila described it as a deep, dark, quiet hole of despair that everyone was just frozen in. As the phone call ended, still no words were spoken, but it was a moment where nothing needed to be said. Their only suspect in her abduction and now murder had not changed. 57-year-old James Worley was fortunately still in custody. The all-important forensics were now coming back in, and as well as phone records placing James in the area that she went missing from at the time she did, the mattress in his barn, some rope, duct tape, and the motorcycle helmet were all covered in both his and Sierra's DNA. His recent internet searches were of pornography, specifically searching the terms hitchhiker, helpless, gag, rape, and hogtied. James Worley was charged with 19 counts, including murder, abduction, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. He was held without bail and pleaded not guilty to every single charge. The investigators' theory was this: using his phone data, they could place him right near where she had been riding with Josh. They believed that he had followed her for a while after he saw them separate, pulled over on his motorbike, and hit her over the head with his helmet. He dragged her into the cornfield, possibly threatening her with the screwdriver the same as he had done with Robin, then tied her up. He then called his brother to get a lift back to the house to get his van, telling him there was something wrong with his bike. He then drove back in his van alone and took her back to the barn. What happened next is not really known, but we can all agree it does not bear thinking about. Right off the bat, the prosecution and her family were seeking the death penalty, and the amount of evidence they had against him was undoubtedly going to make for a very painful but very strong trial. His lawyers were trying to prove that someone else had been there, as there was some unknown DNA under Sierra's fingernails. And they said if someone else was involved, you couldn't say with certainty whether James was the killer or the accomplice. But this DNA could have come from literally anything, and the DNA found inside his barn was all the defense was focused on. His barn and what he did to Robin all those years ago told them everything they needed to know. They called numerous people to the stand, including Sheila, Josh, and Robin, who had survived James' attack back in 1990, while James' team called only 2 people. His lawyers described him as a very damaged man with many mental health issues and implied at one point he had even had an incestuous relationship with his mother before her death. While the prosecution agreed he was undoubtedly a very sick individual, they said there was no evidence for the story about his mother being true. James' own sister testified and said that he was a suspect in at least 3 murders and missing persons cases too, although nothing was ever proven in these. One was the case of 14-year-old Lori and Hill from the 80s, which had sadly since gone cold, and Claudia Tinsley, who James admitted to being in a car with the very night she went missing. After 6 hours of back and forth, the jury reached their verdict. James Worley was found guilty of murder and a total of 17 of the 19 charges. They recommended the death penalty, but his lawyers were hoping for life in prison. They called a criminal psychologist who suggested the attack was motivated by sexual sadism connected with a fetish disorder and diagnosed him with sexual paraphilia disorder. During his sentencing, James went on a 40-minute-long rant claiming he wasn't her killer and that he'd been framed. At one point, he even said, "Don't ask me why she wasn't raped. She was a beautiful girl, but she wasn't, and I'm glad." Her poor family could listen to no more and left the courtroom. The judge agreed with the jury's decision. James Worley was sentenced to death and his execution date was set for 2019. But because he quickly appealed, this was pushed back. His appeal was of course denied, and he is now scheduled to be executed on May 20th, 2025. In a wrongful death lawsuit, Sheila was granted James' property as well as $3,600,000. She said she knew she would probably never see a single cent of that. However, his property was now hers, and this was far more important. She decided it needed to be torn down. I'm not going to lie, there is an emotional gratification in tearing down and burning something you loathe so much. We look forward to removing the darkness and opening it up and letting the light shine in, she said. She hopes the land can become something positive in Sierra's memory rather than a reminder of what happened there. Police also continue to look at the surrounding area for anything else that could lead them to more information and possibly more victims of James. December 2018 witnessed the unanimous passing of Sierra's Law, Ohio Senate Bill 231. The law established a database which is accessible to both law enforcement and members of the public and enables them to identify the presence of violent offenders in their neighborhoods. It also allows police to interview potential suspects within the first 24 to 48 hours after a person is reported missing. By 2021, more than 2,000 offenders were registered in the database. And a question that still remains to this day was, did James have any other victims as well as Robin and Sierra? Police believe yes, he did. They continued to look into his background, cold cases, and any claims made against him. Robin said, "I don't think anybody like him can go 26 years without doing what he did, because you don't just do it and then suppress it and then do it again. For a logical, normal, sane person, that just doesn't make sense. I know his strength and anger." Authorities said you only had to look at his property to realize that place had been designed to kidnap, hold, and assault multiple women without anybody hearing to find them. As well as huge changes in the law, Sierra's hometown remembers her and celebrates her life with every year that passes. A memorial plaque and tree sits at Sierra's old school, Evergreen High School, and they now offer a scholarship in her name too. Justice for Sierra was set up by her family and is a non-profit organization which provides self-defense training courses for schools and educates the public on safety. Her boyfriend Josh also threw himself into campaigning and founded Keeping Our Girls Safe, which also gives classes and works with first responders. The community holds an annual 5Ks race in Sierra's name every year called Jargon for Jargon. And 100 of riders will make the 40-mile drive for the Sierra Jargon Memorial Motorcycle Ride. The thought of what happened to Sierra and what she went through in her last moments is enough to make you feel as sick as it does sad. The pain is excruciating and the depth of emptiness we feel is unexplainable, Sarah's Aunt Tara said. However, I want him to know this. It may seem that he has broken us, but we as a family are stronger than he thinks. And because we were lucky enough to have had Sierra's love, we are unbreakable. Sheila said of her daughter, Sierra's life was worth far more than the 20 years she was able to live. She inspired people she did not know, and I can only wonder what great things she would have accomplished if she was still alive. But in her death, I know she's moving mountains. 21-year-old Alyssa McLemore lived in Kent, Washington, and was known for her funny, vivacious, and deeply caring personality. She was the devoted mother of a 3-year-old daughter and lived with her own mother to help care for her, as her mother was battling a severe autoimmune disease. Alyssa's nurturing nature shone through in her dedication to both her daughter and her ill mother. On April 9, 2009, Alyssa's grandmother, Barbara, called her with urgent news that her mother's health had taken a critical turn. Alyssa assured her grandmother that she would catch a bus and come home immediately. She was only about 6 miles away, so her mother grew increasingly worried when more than an hour passed with no sign of her. Later that evening, the Kent Police Department arrived at Alyssa's family home to inquire about her whereabouts. A chilling 911 call had been made. Someone screamed for help before the call abruptly ended. Alyssa never made it home that day, and her family was left desperate for answers. The call had come from Alyssa's cell phone. Alyssa's family told the police that Alyssa had failed to make it home and asked them for help, but they were told that Alyssa had not committed any crime and that she was allowed to come and go as she pleased because she was an adult. It would be 4 days before the family could file a missing persons report and the investigation into Alyssa's disappearance began. The day before that report was finally taken, Alyssa's mother, Gracie, passed away at the age of 35, unable to see her daughter in her final days and say goodbye. Alyssa's mother's family belonged to the Aleut tribe, and the women in her family were subject to many of the struggles that plagued Native communities. Her mother, Gracie, and Aunt Tina grew up surrounded by substance abuse and violence. Gracie became pregnant with Alyssa when she was just 14, and Tina, who was just 2 years older than her sister, became pregnant just a few months later. Tina raised Alyssa along with her own daughter while her mother, Barbara, worked to support the family. Gracie was eventually able to complete her GED and attend community college. She suffered from scleroderma, and her condition eventually worsened to the point that she was unable to work. Alyssa also faced difficulties of her own, struggling to support her beloved daughter. She was arrested 4 times for prostitution-related offenses between September of 2008 and February 8 of 2009, a fact which her family believes impacted the investigation into her disappearance. I just kind of feel like they wrote her off as a prostitute, and they probably thought that, she didn't have family. Her Aunt Tina told CNN in 2019. There were a few other issues with the early investigation. DNA samples from Alyssa's family were not uploaded to the National Missing and Unidentified Person System for potential future comparison for 2 years, despite the fact that Washington state law dictates that this be done after a person is missing for 30 days and in cases where criminal activity is suspected. Alyssa, who is of Alaska Native and African American descent, was also misidentified as Asian in her police report and therefore in the FBI's National Crime Information Center database. The error would not be fixed for 7 years. Because Alyssa's cell phone was not equipped with GPS, police were only able to narrow down the location where she made her 911 call to within a 2-mile radius of the cell tower it pinged off of. In 2019, the recording of the 10-second-long call was sent to the FBI and 2 independent analysts in hopes of identifying other voices or sounds in the background. A witness came forward after Alyssa went missing, claiming to have seen her getting to a 1990s model green truck, but it has not been confirmed if this sighting occurred on the day Alyssa disappeared. Alyssa's family worked tirelessly on her case, led by her Aunt Tina Russell. They have distributed flyers, organized searches, and held events to keep the public from forgetting about Alyssa and to ask for witnesses to finally come forward. Anytime Tina Russell hears of remains being found in Washington state or in Oregon, she gets in contact with the local medical examiner to see if they could be Alyssa's. The family often felt alone in their efforts as the years went on without answers. But that changed in January of 2018 when Tina Russell received a message on social media from an activist working for missing and murdered Indigenous women. Indigenous women and girls are subjected to violence, go missing, and are murdered at rates much higher than the women in other demographics. These crimes also largely go unreported, meaning that the true extent of the problem is much worse. For years, activists have worked to bring attention to and hopefully one day eradicate crimes against these women, as well as support the families of the missing and murdered. Tina Russell says that the movement and the help it has given her family has renewed her hope in finding out what happened to Alyssa. Over the years, Alyssa's family has looked into renting billboards to display Alyssa's picture and ask for tips in the case, but the cost involved was prohibitively high. Luckily, in 2019, Alyssa was selected to be part of the Washington State Police's Homeward Bound program. The program was started by Trooper Renee Paget in 2005 and partners with local trucking companies to display images of missing people and phone numbers to call with tips on the sides of semi-trailers, essentially making the mobile billboards as they travel through the region. The project has featured 28 missing people, 3 of whom have since been located. Camway Transportation, the Washington State Police's current partner in this effort, plans to put Alyssa on a total of 3 of their trailers. Even though a decade has passed since Alyssa vanished, her family is still hopeful that one day their advocacy for her will result in the answers that will offer them some measure of closure. Terrence Woods Jr. grew up in Capitol Heights, Maryland, and was one of 4 children. After graduating from Flowers High School, he enrolled at the Philip Merrill College of Journalism at the University of Maryland. He graduated from the university in 2013 and then moved to the United Kingdom to study at the American International University in London, where he earned a master's degree in international relations. Terrence's former professors described him as bright, driven, and about journalism and visual storytelling. He traveled around the world working on a variety of programs, from documentaries to television shows such as The Voice UK. In 2018, the 26-year-old was working for Raw TV, a London-based production company. That fall, he traveled to Idaho to work as a production assistant on a documentary. He was set to be in Idaho until mid-November working on the project, but on the morning of October 5th, he sent his father, Terrence Sr., a text message saying that he would be coming home on October 10th. Terrence Sr. was surprised because his son had never come home early from a work assignment before, despite sometimes working in very remote areas with challenging conditions such as Alaska, where he had previously worked on the Discovery series Gold Rush, Whitewater. Terrence Jr. spent the rest of that day working with the other 11 members of the crew in the remote area surrounding the abandoned Penman gold mine in the Nez Perce National Forest in northern Idaho. Other members of the crew would later report that Terrence had been behaving strangely that day and was unusually quiet. As they were preparing to end work for the day, Terrence abruptly dropped his two-way radio and ran to the edge of a nearby cliff. He suddenly disappeared from view, and the other members of the crew thought he must have fallen. However, when they looked down, Terrence was running down the steep hill below, already 15 feet away from them. Other members of the crew tried to run after Terrence, but he refused to stop, and they eventually lost sight of him in the densely wooded area. Authorities were notified of Terrence's disappearance at 6:41 p.m. that evening, but were unable to begin a search for him until morning. The Idaho County Sheriff's Office, the Idaho Department of Fish and Game, and the U.S. Forest Service were all involved in the early search, but their efforts were hampered by ice and snow. Eventually, conditions improved enough that the Air Force could fly helicopters equipped with infrared over the area. The Sheriff's Department in neighboring Clearwater County sent search dogs to help look for Terrence, and several local search and rescue groups also aided in the effort. A week after Terrence disappeared, the search for him was scaled back. According to the Idaho County Sheriff's Office, this was because no leads were obtained from the previous 7 days of searching, and no signs of Mr. Woods have been located in the search area or the expanded search area. Terrence's parents, Valerie and Terrence Sr., flew to Idaho to help look for their son. While they have praised the efforts of most of the law enforcement officers involved in their son's case and the local search and rescue groups who helped look for Terrence, they quickly took issue with Idaho County Sheriff Doug Giddings. When they met with him, Valerie asked him what other options they had for the search. His response was, "What are you supposed to do for someone who does not want to be found?" Terrence and Valerie were upset by this because the sheriff had no way to prove that Terrence was trying to avoid being located. It was also suggested to Valerie and Terrence that their son ran off because he had some sort of panic attack. They do not believe that this is the case because Terrence had no history of any sort of mental illness. Terrence Sr. is highly skeptical of the account the other members of the film crew provided. He believes that his son saw or heard something he should not have during the shooting of the documentary. He also believes that his son was not found during the large-scale search because his son was no longer in the woods. Someone had taken him elsewhere. Sheriff Giddings maintains that there are no signs of foul play in the case. Despite the lack of progress in the case, the Woods family has vowed to not give up until they find answers about what happened to Terrence. Bernadette Cooper loved to travel. She was a native of Castleblaney County, Monaghan, but moved to London while she was in her early 20s. She married and had 2 sons, Paul and Desmond, but the marriage ended in divorce. She and her ex-husband shared custody of their children. By the late 1980s, Bernadette had remarried and had another son, Stephen. She and her husband Brian wanted to live abroad somewhere warm and sunny and were living in Spain on the Costa del Sol. They ran a pub called Molly Malone's in Buenomedina. Bernadette's personality made her well-suited for the work. She was feisty and vivacious and liked by all those who met her because of her friendly demeanor. The bar was initially very successful, but when a recession hit the Spanish economy in the early 1990s, Bernadette and Brian struggled to keep it open, falling behind on their bills. While dealing with the financial stress, they were also dealing with a great deal of stress on their marriage. In 1991, Brian returned to their home in Surrey to begin divorce proceedings, leaving Stephen and Bernadette behind in Spain. Bernadette was determined to keep her bar open. However, despite her best efforts, by late 1992, unable to pay her rent, she had to temporarily close Molly Malone's. She and Stephen returned to London so that Bernadette could finalize her divorce and try to raise the funds to save the bar. Bernadette tried to raise money from her family members and friends, but none of them were in a position to help her. Somehow, though, by January of 1993, she had apparently managed to acquire what she needed to reopen the bar. That month, she called a friend back in Spain from a phone at the Horse and Groom Public House on Mitcham Lane in London. She asked the friend to go to her lawyer and tell him not to give up the lease on the bar because she was on her way back to town with the money needed to reopen it. This phone call would be the last known time anyone saw or heard from Bernadette. Her friend did as Bernadette asked and went to see the lawyer, who was pleased that he would not have to sell the lease on the bar. The bar remained closed, waiting for Bernadette's return for the rest of the winter, but when she failed to return to Ben Almedina, the lawyer did have to sell the lease. The new occupants of the building found all of Bernadette's belongings still packed up in the building's attic. Bernadette's family was not immediately concerned about her. They, like her husband, assumed she had returned to Spain alone to save the bar. They thought perhaps she wasn't in contact with them because her feelings were hurt when they couldn't help her with her financial problems. However, the unreturned phone calls eventually became concerning, and a visit to Spain revealed that Bernadette had never arrived back there. The family then began actively looking for Bernadette, making frequent trips to Spain to distribute flyers and look for witnesses. They started a word-of-mouth campaign trying to find information about Bernadette and the Irish communities in London and in Spain. They hired a lawyer to investigate the disappearance in 1996. When that investigation found nothing, the Salvation Army was asked to look for her. When that effort was, the UK Missing Persons Unit was asked for help, but again, they could not find Bernadette. It would later be discovered that the efforts had only searched for her using her given first name, Susan, and not her middle name, Bernadette, which was the name she actually went by. Bernadette's family spent the following decades traveling to Spain regularly and following up any lead they could find, but Bernadette remained missing. On his deathbed, Bernadette's brother Jim told his son, Leon Moore, how troubled he was by the fact that he was never able to find his sister. Before Jim died, Leon promised him that he would find Bernadette. Leon, along with Bernadette's son and sister, has made great progress in his aunt's case. In 2020, leading up to what would be Bernadette's 77th birthday on June 20th, Leon was able to get Bernadette's story reported on in media outlets in the UK, Ireland, and Spain, renewing public interest in the case. The Surrey Constabulary opened a formal inquiry into Bernadette's disappearance with plans to try to coordinate with authorities in Ireland and Spain on the investigation. While Bernadette has been gone for 27 years, the passage of time has not diminished the pain her family feels or their hope to one day find out what became of her. She was a wonderful woman, my favorite aunt, a really great person, kind-hearted and strong-willed. That's why her disappearance is so out of character, Leon said of his aunt in 2020. It's very hard to not have closure or any information for so long about Bernadette's disappearance. It's heartbreaking. There are lots of gray areas in this. We just want answers. 21-year-old Roy Gregory Brooks Jr., who went by Greg, lived with his family in Castleberry, Florida. The family attended New Covenant Baptist Church of Orlando, and Greg sang in the church choir. He had attended Lyman High School, where he played drums in the school band. After graduation, he enrolled at Florida A&M University. While he was home from school, he worked at the Regal Cinema in Winter Park. On January 18, 2000, Roy left home to go pick up his paycheck from the cinema. He then planned to go to the Winn-Dixie grocery store in Castleberry to cash it. Around 3 a.m. on January 19th, Greg's mother, Geraldine, abruptly woke up, feeling that something terrible had happened. Greg was not home. While he would sometimes stay out late with his friends, being out this late was unusual. An hour and a half later, Greg's black 1992 Honda Accord was found parked near an exit ramp for Interstate 75 in Sun City, Hillsborough County, in an area that at the time had not yet been developed. A trooper from the Florida Highway Patrol saw the car and tagged it as a disabled vehicle. It would later be found that there was nothing mechanically wrong with the car and it was fully operational. When Greg was still not home later in the morning, Geraldine Brooks called police to report him missing. The Brooks family did not learn that Greg's car had been found until 2 days later. The car is the main piece of evidence in Greg's case, but also a source of great confusion. The vehicle was taken in to the Seminole County Sheriff's Office for processing on January 27th, but Greg's father had been allowed to drive it back to Castleberry before it was taken in. The report from the car stated that the only fingerprints found inside the car were Greg's. The Brooks family, of course, expected Greg's father's fingerprints to be in the car as he was the last person to drive it. Furthermore, Greg would routinely give rides to all of his friends, but somehow none of their prints were found either. Geraldine Brooks became frustrated with the way her son's case was handled from the very beginning. Police told her that her son had simply run away, and she has argued that this belief prevented them from investigating Greg's case properly. She argues that Greg had no need to run away because as a 21-year-old man, he could have packed up and left home at any time he wanted. Furthermore, he did not have any of his clothes, belongings, or medication with him when he disappeared. He also loved his car too much to simply abandon it along the side of the road. Authorities also failed to go to the Winn-Dixie where Greg cashed his check the night he went missing early enough in the investigation. A receipt found in his car showed that Greg had made it to the store and cashed his $200 paycheck at 6 p.m. By the time police did go to the store several weeks later, the surveillance footage from that evening had already been taped over. The investigator currently assigned to the case, Castleberry Police Department Detective Thomas Graffey, believes that the original detectives did what they could with the limited amount of information available. It seems like they followed whatever breadcrumbs they had at the time, he told the Orlando Sentinel in 2020. No one had cell phones or social media, so it was a little bit harder to track people back then. They just needed to do what they could. Greg's family has been actively looking for him on their own since he disappeared. Geraldine tried unsuccessfully to get her son's case covered by the local media in hopes of finding witnesses. The family distributed flyers, hired a private investigator, and followed up on potential sightings of Greg in 3 states. Geraldine keeps a spiral notebook full of her notes and developments in the case, including the names of all the numerous detectives assigned to the case over the years. She still keeps Greg's Honda Accord parked in her driveway 20 years after he went missing. Originally, she wanted to hold onto the car in case it could provide further clues in Greg's case, but now it mainly just serves as a reminder of him. Greg went missing the day before his younger brother Jermaine's 16th birthday. Jermaine looked up to his older brother, and his disappearance affected him greatly. Jermaine had been an excellent student, but his grades plummeted after Greg went missing. Today, he has a 4-year-old son who has never gotten to meet his uncle Greg. Geraldine loves being a grandmother, but it has not erased the pain of not knowing what happened to Greg. I have to enjoy what I can, but I still grieve for my son every single day, she said in 2020. Ashley Simpson was born in Calgary but lived and worked all over Canada. She loved the outdoors and enjoyed hiking and gold panning. She was able to explore a large area of the country because she traveled around with her father, John, who worked as a cook at various mines and hunting lodges and was training Ashley in the profession. While Ashley did not necessarily have a passion for being a cook, she loved being able to travel and work with her father. She got along well with her other co-workers and with customers. In February of 2016, Ashley moved into a trailer on Yankee Flats Road near Salmon Arm, British Columbia with her boyfriend, Derek. On April 27, 2016, the couple got into an argument about finances. Ashley had plans to travel to Ontario to see her family. She was going to attend her sister's baby shower and then go to work with her father for the summer. However, there was no money for her to use to make the trip. After the argument ended, Derek went inside their trailer and went to sleep. When Derek woke up the following morning and Ashley was not there, he was not immediately concerned because he assumed someone had given her a ride into town so she could start making her way to Ontario. However, Ashley never got in contact with her family or arrived home. She was reported missing on April 30th. Authorities had few leads in the early days of the investigation. The first potential piece of physical evidence was not found for 2.5 years. On October 9, 2018, Ashley's Ontario photo identification was found inside a sewage vacuum truck used by the Sasquatch Crossing Lodge in Pink Mountain, British Columbia, while its tank was being cleaned. Pink Mountain is roughly 800 miles north of where Ashley was last seen. The ID was not highly discolored and appeared as though, however it ended up in the tank, it had not been there for very long. However, Ashley had spent 3 seasons working with her father at the Buffalo Inn, the motel associated with the Sasquatch Crossing Lodge. John Simpson believes his daughter had her ID stolen at some point, meaning that the ID that was found could have been the stolen one and ended up in the tanks because the thief lost or discarded it, not because Ashley had been back in the area. What at first seemed like it may be a promising clue, ultimately did not move the case forward. Ashley was not the only woman to go missing in that area of British Columbia around that time. Between 2016 and 2017, for other women, Caitlin Potts, Tracy Gennaro, Deanna Wirtz, and Nicole Bell all went missing in that area. Tracy did not remain missing, however. In November of 2017, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police located her remains during a search of a farm located between Vernon and Salmon Arm, British Columbia. The RCMP searched the property for more than a week after they found Tracy, beating the speculation that they may have been looking for the remains of the other missing women. The farm was owned by the parents of a man named Curtis Sagmohan, who has since been charged and convicted on charges stemming from violent attacks against women. He so far has not been formally linked to the disappearances of any of the women or Tracy Gennaro's death. When their daughter first went missing, Cindy and John Simpson considered all of the possibilities. She could have been trafficked or kidnapped and held against her will. However, based on the passage of time and their conversations with the RCMP, they believe that Ashley is most likely not alive. "I know somebody took her life and I know that people know about it," Cindy said in 2020. "Somebody knows something. There is more than one person who knows and they are being quiet. Even if Ashley is deceased, her family wants to bring her home to lay her to rest." John Simpson has made multiple trips to British Columbia to look for her, depleting his life savings in the process. During one of these trips in the spring of 2017, John planned on searching for his daughter's remains along the banks of the Salmon River. Unfortunately, the river had recently flooded, and the area was not safe to search on foot. John then had the idea to use drones in the search. He spoke to some friends he had made in the area who were able to put him in contact with a 14-year-old who had multiple drones. John hired the boy to search the riverbanks from above with his drones, and while Ashley was not found during this first set of drone searches, the experience showed John just how useful drones could be in cases his daughters. The Simpson family had already been raising money for women's shelters following Ashley's disappearance. They then decided to add another charity event to their roster and raised enough money to buy drones for a volunteer group searching for the 4 missing women near Salmon and Arm. He hopes to eventually build up a network of drones and drone operators to assist families with missing loved ones all across Canada. Cindy Simpson still speaks to the RCMP regularly, but so far, there have been no new leads in Ashley's case. All it takes is somebody to say enough is enough and call the RCMP, Cindy said in 2020. Just make at least one family's life a little better. It will never be the way it was, but it could be a little better by having Ashley home and resting with her family where she belongs. John Simpson's uncle is offering a $10,000 reward in Ashley's case. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.